All right, Parsha 101, Parshas Metzora. This week's Torah portion continues much of what was spoken about in last week's portion about Tzara'as, in that it goes on about more of the laws of Tzara'as, which is this spiritual affliction that occurred. But this time it's not necessarily about people, it's more about, it's about how someone gets purified from it, and then also about houses. More of the laws about what happens in the houses. And then it talks about other impurities at the end of the Parsha. So the name of this week's Parsha comes from the second verse. The first verse is Vaydavar Hashem Moshe Lemar. God spoke to Moshe saying, Tzara'as HaMetzora. This is going to be like the law of the Metzora. As in, this is how things are going to go down if someone gets Tzara'as. Now, so the whole thing starts off with how someone gets purified from Tzara'as. So if someone gets this whole last week's Torah portion was all about how to identify, and the Kohen has to proclaim that this is what it is, and either he has to be quarantined or gets let's add, and he counts this amount of days, that amount of days, whatever. So someone who did have Tzara'as, going to be daytime now, and they are outside of the camp. They're not allowed to be with everybody else. They had to be outside the camp until they were fully healed. And once they were fully healed, they would call for the Kohen, and the Kohen would come outside the camp to meet them. And they're going to check. This is like a whole process that occurred on the first and the 7 days after the person's healed. So there's a week after they've been healed where this whole purification process has to go down. And the Kohen is going to be brought. He's going to have 2 fowl, so 2 certain kinds of birds that can be used for this. A cedar stick that's like 48 centimeters or kind of like 19 inches. And then like a strip of scarlet wool and hyssop branch. And it's actually the cedar stick and the hyssop, they get tied together with the scarlet wool. And then the fowl are going to be shechted, and the blood's going to be collected in an earthenware vessel that also has spring water in it. Kind of like 2.91 ounces, about 86 milliliters. And everything's going to go in there, and then you got to dip the branches in there. You kind of dip it in the blood water mixture. And then this whole ritual that goes on, and then the finger goes in, and you guys sprinkle it toward the person, and that's how we begin the purification thing. Now, only one of the birds gets shechted. The other bird gets sent away into an open field, and it just goes, and that's the end of it. Now, the garments have to be immersed in a mikveh. The person's going to have to be immersed in the mikveh. And also the person has to shave all their hair off as part of the purification that's needed. And this whole thing, so they do that on the first day, and the whole thing's going to be repeated on the 7th day. Now, on the 8th day, everything's fine dandy, and completing their purification now, completing the whole cycle, they bring 2 unblemished male or female lambs. No, they do bring 2 unblemished male and 1 female lambs. They're going to bring it now as sacrifices. The 3 kind of sacrifices, a chatas, an asham, and an olah. So the sin offering, a guilt offering, and an ascent offering. So all the process that's been described until now about offering sacrifices is what's going to occur here. And each one of them have to be brought with like the grain. So they have like a 1/10 of fine flour and half a hin of oil. And then they have to bring 3 times a quarter of a hin of oil, because each sacrifice has to be offered with all the other stuff. And they also bring an extra log of oil. So it's an extra thing of oil. So they can't enter yet because they're not fully pure yet. So they're going to be outside the tent of meeting. They can't come into the Mishkan yet, and the Kohen's going to meet them there, and he's going to take care of the shechting or whatever. So the first one, the guilt offering, the whole thing happens how the blood gets applied to the mizbeach, to the altar, etc. Now, some of that blood is also collected, and it's applied. This kind of we saw with the way Moshe brought Aaron and his sons into the priesthood. Kind of, it's the same kind of idea that they take the blood, and they apply some to the middle ridge of the right ear, the thumb of the right hand, and the big toe on the right foot. Blood gets put each thing. Then the extra oil that's brought, the Kohen is going to pour some into his left hand, and he dips his right index finger in, and he sprinkles it 7 times toward the Holy of Holies. He's going to sprinkle it there. And then he also puts oil in the same place where he put the blood. So in the middle of the ridge of the right ear, the thumb of the right hand, and another big right toe. And then whatever's left, they're going to also put some on the person's head. And now everything is pure. And they offer the other 2 sacrifices, and everything is great. A person is totally cured now of this Tzara'as and totally purified from it. Now, again, we must mention last time that a lot of laws that we see of purity and impurity, things work very differently today. Well, first of all, because we don't have a Mishkan, we don't have Beis HaMikdash, and also because our sensitivities, our generation, the way purities and impurities work, it's very different. We can't necessarily purify ourselves in the way that they used to. So the way some of these laws, okay, also there's no Tzara'as anymore, but the way some of the laws of pure and impure apply are different. There's different applications of it. Not because they're not applicable as a general idea, because these are still mitzvahs of the Torah, but the way that they could be implemented these days is different. So there were certain modifications made for our time, which you'll see when we get to some of the later stuff that this Torah portion talks about. Now, it does say that if a person's poor and they can't afford to bring 3 lambs for sacrifices, they could switch out 2 of those lambs for 2 young turtle doves or 2 pigeons. But the guilt offering is going to be a lamb. Now comes the whole thing with Tzara'as on a home. So this is kind of like this lesion or something like that is going to spread out on a home. And the way that the wording goes, that God says that when you're going to enter the land that I'm going to give you, there might be Tzara'as on the home. Rashi, foremost commentator on the Torah, says that part of the reason of why Tzara'as would appear in a home, because part of the procedures of whether it comes off or not, or it might eventually lead to the house being destroyed, because one of the nations, the Amorites, they knew that the Jewish people were coming. Everyone knew when the Jewish people left Egypt, they knew they were going to Israel. They knew they were going to Canaan. And 40 years, they were hoarding all their treasures and stuff like that, and were sticking them into the walls of their homes, anticipating that even if the Jewish people come and kind of kick them out, they're eventually going to get kicked out of their own homeland, and they'll be able to come take it back from them. So they figure we'll hide it all here, and eventually we'll get our stuff again. That obviously didn't happen, because then Hashem would cause this Tzara'as to break out, and the home would be destroyed, and there'd be great wealth to the person whose home it was. Let's say a person notices something's happening on their wall. So you have to go to the Kohen. They don't say, "Oh, I have Tzara'as in my house." They have to say something that looks like Tzara'as is appearing on the wall. They don't know, it looks kind of suspicious to me. So the Kohen says, clean out everything from your house, and then I'm going to come check it. Because if the Kohen comes and says, "Oh yeah, this is Tzara'as," then everything becomes impure, right? And then all the procedures that have to happen according to what's there. But if they clear it out before the Kohen comes, then he didn't say it's impure yet, so all the stuff can still be salvaged, I guess. It doesn't have to go through any sort of purification or just being destroyed if it can't be purified. So kind of like when they come for termite inspections, that they have to tent the house, or you got to clear everything out so it doesn't get ruined. Now, so what's going to happen, there might be this lesion that appears on the stone, and it's going to be this rectangular size, 308 millimeters squared, 0.48 inches squared, or is that 1.48 inches squared? And whatever, it's gonna be pure red or pure green, and it's gonna kind of look sunken. It's a sunken looking stain that's gonna seem deeper than the wall. So it looks like it's gonna be sunken in this red or green thing that's spreading out on the wall. So the Kohen comes in and he's gonna step out and he says, okay, the house has to have a 7-day quarantine now. If during that 7 days the color gets lighter or disappears, then you can just kind of scrape off the area and say, okay, now everything's pure. However, if it spreads, well, now there's a whole other thing that has to happen. The stones with the legion on it, but that has this green and red area on it, they have to be scraped off, and everything has to be disposed of. If it spreads, and the stones that have this legion on it have to be removed. So you got to cut out stones from the wall, and they'll have to be deposited in a designated area outside the city, because these are impure stones now, so they can't just be anywhere. Then they're going to scrape out like the mortar, whatever, anything that kind of like the area of where the legion appeared, and replace the stones, and now we're going to quarantine the house again. And then they have to see what happens. Right, now that we've replastered and put in new stones, is this appearing again? Right, and if it doesn't reappear, okay, everything's pure now, everything's fine. Or, the process of making it pure. But if it does appear again, well, now this whole thing, the whole house has got to go. Right, so this is it was quarantined 1 week, it was quarantined another week, now this is the 3rd week. If this is spread and it's burst out everywhere, then the whole house has to be destroyed. All the stone, the wood, mortar, everything. It's got to be destroyed, and all that's got to be deposited in the designated area outside of the city. Now, if anybody enters the house during the quarantine time, they become impure until evening. So there's a whole procedure, definitely, but there's also, again, these laws of purity and impurity, the sensitivity was much stronger then. So there's a lot of things like attached to it. Now, when the house is going to be purified, so, they scraped out whatever they have to do. If it comes to a point, not whether we're building the whole house, but some part of it was scraped off or whatever, they're going to purify the house. It looks it's similar to what happened to the person with the fowl and the cedar stick and the scarlet wool and the hyssop and dipping the finger in with the blood and water thing, and then you sprinkle it towards the house 7 times. And that's now how the house is purified. So that actually ends the whole section about Tzara'as. So last week's portion we had with people and we had with a garment, and this week is how to purify a person and how to what happens with the house. Now it switches over to talking about different kind of impurities that can occur with a man or a woman. Starting with a man, it talks about what it called like an abnormal. It does normal and abnormal seminal discharge. They call it like a zav. So this is a person. It's an impurity that occurs, and the person is impure. And there's a whole thing about how many days and what does it look like and blah blah blah. This whole thing that it is. And the biggest thing is that anything that the person sits on, like while this is all going on, anything the person sits on or touches, whatever, becomes impure. And anybody who touches it becomes impure in contact, right? So that means that either they're going to have to immerse the garments or themselves in the mikveh, and then they're impure until evening. Now, why does all the impurity stuff matter? Because that means that they can't go into the Mishkan, they can't go into the Beis HaMikdash, they can't eat food from a carbon, they can't eat truma, or they can't eat any of these foods that are designated as either sacrifice foods or foods that have been brought, like the truma, which is part of a portion that's given to those officiating in the Beis HaMikdash. So these foods take on a new status of holiness, and they can't participate in it, or else it's a sin if they do, right? So that's why all these things are important, even though today it doesn't exactly look the same way as it did then, which is, again, is part of some of the application becomes different because of it, because we have our sensitivities less and we don't have a Beis HaMikdash today. Now there's a whole thing, if you remember, we spoke about if earthenware it becomes impure, so it has to be shattered, because it can't become, there's no purification for an earthenware vessel. Even today, we have certain materials that cannot be either toiveled or they can't be koshered, depending on what they're made out of. So this kind of stuff actually still applies, according to what the material is made out of. So, for example, it says there's a wooden vessel. So if you have a wooden bowl, you could immerse it, right? If this person touched it. Now, this person, the man's, after this occurs, 7 days after it's done, he and his clothes are going to go to mikveh, and it specifically has to be in spring water or in like a flowing natural source of water, not just like a pond or a stagnant source of water. And then on the 8th day, he's going to bring 2 turtle doves or pigeons, 2 turtle doves or pigeons to the Kohen as a karban chatas and an olah, so as a sin offering and an ascent offering. So that's what a man has to do. And then it talks about a woman. So like when a woman's going through, it's called a nida, she's going through her when she's menstruating, or if there's something abnormal out of the ordinary, then it's zava. So it's also different laws like this. And it's the same kind of thing with her. Anything she touches, she sits on, becomes impure during this time. There's actually this whole count of there's like a 7-day cycle. And then once the 7 days are over, then if 11 days go by or whatever, and then things start up again, then that becomes like a new cycle. So this whole 7-day, 11-day, or 11 plus days thing, and the way that they count it, and that, or if it happens within the 4th day and the 11th cycle, so 11-day cycle, so is that considered as a not? So you have a lot of the laws. These laws, much of them do apply today, especially between people who are married to each other. And so this is where the origin of a lot of that is. It's biblical, where all this stuff comes from. So in this case also, it's very similar, that someone can become tameh on contact. They can become impure on contact, like if they touch the chair that someone sat in while they were impure, then they become impure until evening. The saddle, something that's a couch that's made for reclining on, and all that sort of stuff. And it's actually an interesting thing that's pointed out by the commentaries, that this all goes back originally to the sin of the Tzara'as, the sin in the Garden of Eden, of eating from the tree, and part of that is because certain changes that occurred then had to do with childbearing or the pain of it and all this that comes with it. The woman knows that all the stuff that comes with it, and part of it because the world changed so drastically then, and the things that we do kind of as a secondary part of it is we're trying to restore the world to the way it was then, right? Back to this idyllic time when godliness was fully revealed. Now, there's another thing. So back to the woman, if something happens that's considered abnormal, then she could be impure also, and then she has to wait 7 days until she could become pure again, and then immersing in the mikveh and all this sort of stuff. And then the 8th day also, she's supposed to bring 2 turtle doves or pigeons. So the ones for the man and for the woman, things that are considered a little bit more normal is one thing, and then when it becomes something that's a little bit abnormal, that's when the sacrifices come in. And the Torah portion ends off with these are laws, and don't be tameh, don't be impure when you come into my mishkan, into my holy house. My house is a holy place, so make sure that you are pure and do not be impure when you come in to see me. And that is the end of Parshas Metzora.